Why, when nations pray for peace, are they caught up in a whirlpool of war? Why, when mothers pray for their children, do tragedies still happen? Does God answer prayer? Call 1-800-234-DAWN for the free booklet, How God Answers Prayer. There is a clear and comforting answer in the pages of your Bible. Call 1-800-234-DAWN. Ask for How God Answers Prayer.
Good afternoon. This is Truth Seeker, and it's not the prettiest day, but at least it's mild. You can sit outside and do this video. I hope the wind doesn't interfere with the sound. I've noticed that with some of my outdoor videos. You got a Baltimore Oriole serenading us. They just arrived about a week and a half ago. My wife has taken quite a pleasure in the Baltimore Orioles returning. They come back every year. It's been that way for quite a number of years now. But anyway, I started this video out with a clip which really surprised me, because the Dawn Bible students hadn't put anything out in a public way in a long time, anything new, that is. It's been since the 1980s, I would say, that since the Dawn made any films, any videos, tried television spots that were up to date, new, something that was not from the 50s. If you go to the Dawn's website, I noticed that it basically hasn't changed since 1997. And I know that because I was the original creator of that website. I had taught myself HTML, some of the basics of HTML. I created a demonstration website for the Dawn. I pitched the concept to the Dawn trustees in 1997. Actually, it was the fall of '96 at the November annual meeting. The Dawn holds its annual meeting the first weekend of November. And so all 12 trustees were there, and there were some that were vehemently opposed to the idea of getting on the internet because of satanic influences, and that there was a lot of pornography on the internet, and we shouldn't be using the internet because of that. And I said, well, there are other media the Dawn uses, such as the Dawn magazine, and most pornography at the time was sold in convenience stores, in the racks of the periodicals. There was so many porn magazines at the time that you could buy. And I said, you don't avoid using pamphlets and magazine media to spread the message just because pornography is spread that same way. So many saw through the argument, and they approved the website. But I noticed that while the website has been added to over the years, it's been 21 years. There hasn't been a change to that website. I was cruising through the internet the other day, and I noticed that there was some comments made in a forum of some sort about the Dawn, and these were actually 3 or 4 years ago. Some of these were older comments, and one comment was, it looked like the Dawn website hadn't changed since 1996, and it's the truth. It hadn't changed since 1996. So seeing a commercial that was brand new, the one that you just saw, was a shock to me. So I did a little more searching, and they're on some kind of something that's new to me. I can't say that I'm a tech savvy individual, and so it actually is something new to me. All of this stuff, and this is called iSpot TV, and I noticed that they have four 30-second spots or 40-second television commercials that the Dawn Bible students have issued in 2018. So these are brand new, right off the press. I didn't know that the Dawn was that active. Right now, as we make this video, I'm downloading a video from YouTube. I have to admit that the Bible student is my cousin. I'm related to him. He's a first cousin. He's a nice person, but I don't have much in the way of contact with him, and I don't have much in the way of contact with a lot of my extended family because I no longer am a Bible student. Earlier videos I've made provide reasons as to why I lost my beliefs and faith in the Bible students and all religion, actually. So I'm waiting for that clip to download because he said something that was interesting. Now, one thing that my cousin is very keen on and has been ever since he was a young man. He is older than me by some years. I think about 5 or 6 years. He may be that much older than me. And he is a very prominent Bible student. He has always been looked to as being one of the intellectual Bible students because of his interest in the technical side of the Bible. Again, like I said in my last video, the Bible students, they look at the Bible as it's the Da Vinci Code, that there's something to be read between the lines, that there's something to be figured out. And this idea originated with Charles Russell, the founder of the Bible Students and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Charles Russell met with an individual, actually a number of individuals who had quite a bit of influence in his formulating his beliefs. And a number of them, most of them actually, all originated from the Second Adventist group that originated with William Miller. I'm sorry, but I need some warm coffee because my throat it is a little irritated today. I think it's the allergies and early spring. But William Miller really began this chronological craze where he was putting numbers that were found in very various places in the Old Testament and putting them together and using them as a way of trying to understand when Jesus would return, because that's been Christianity's main concern for the last 2,000 years, is the return of Jesus Christ. I see our oriole up here. Well, he's a beautiful bird, bright orange belly, black wings. But this craze began in the early 19th century, early to mid 19th century, and Russell picked up on it. Many of the individuals that he had associated with as a young man were older gentlemen like George Storrs and George Stetson, um, and eventually Nelson Barber, who all had been associated with William Miller, and all had this fascination with Bible numerology, Bible chronology. Let's put it that way. And in a way, you can't necessarily blame them, although science was well footed, um, and the idea of the scientific method was pretty well founded. Mathematics was advancing at a rapid rate. Um, the In the 19th century, it still was a period of general darkness among many of the lay people. Um, it was more of the educated uh, people who went to university, and that was very few people compared to today. Today, many more people have the opportunity to go to college than ever before, and have a higher education, higher learn critical thinking that wasn't available to most people in the even in the 19th century. For example, Karl Gauss was born to peasant or almost peasant circumstances, and if it wasn't for his brilliance and somebody recognizing his brilliance and somebody sponsoring him, he wouldn't have gone to school. And he was probably one of the brightest mathematicians that ever lived. So this was the situation in the 19th century, and there was a lot of pseudoscience. There was a lot of quackery that was going on in all kinds of fields. And to the average person, it was hard for them to decipher. Many people didn't have education beyond reading and writing. For example, Charles Russell, who started the Bible students movement, had no more than a seventh grade education. So, he wasn't. He really didn't have the education behind him to develop true critical thinking skills. And this came out later on in trials and things, lawsuits that were charged against him. I guess he sued when the Watchtower moved to Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Eagle took issue with the Watchtower right away and did some critical articles on them, and Russell sued them for slander. And one of the allegations was that he wasn't a Bible scholar, and that he didn't even know the Greek alphabet. And when when he filed this libel suit against the Brooklyn Eagle, it became evident that it was true that he didn't even know the Greek alphabet. And then he said, well, you don't really need to know ancient Greek because strong concordance, all the work has been done for the lay person. But you see, there are nuances and there are subtleties in understanding the ancient languages that allow a person to understand, when they're trained, to see where forgeries may be and where errors may have been crept in. And you see, Russell took the Bible, especially the King James Version of the Bible, at face value, and he took it as infallible, as in the same way that many Christian religions today claim that the Bible is infallible. So Russell was working on. He didn't really have the basis with which to the skills with which to really analyze and properly critique the scriptures. And so he formulated a number of doctrines that he had put together from people that he associated with. He really didn't originate most of the key doctrines that became the hallmark of the Bible student movement. He was a I wonder if I'm getting capture on this. I'm looking at something strange there, but anyway, his understanding was a sort of a patchwork of understanding doctrines that came from one person and then another person, and by the time he had met Nelson Barber, he was taken in by Barber's chronology. Prior to that, Russell didn't really show too much interest in chronology, but then after talking with Barber, he was taken in by it, and Russell was that sort of person. Certain things intrigued him. He'd be the kind of person that would be, if he didn't have religion, he would be sort of a UFO hunter today. During the 1880s, he became fascinated with the pyramid and Charles Piazzi Smythe, and he contacted Charles Piazzi Smythe, who Mario Livio, a well-reputed astrophysicist today, called Charles Piazzi Smythe a pyramidiot. It's somewhat strong, but Smythe was supposed to be the astronomer royal for the country of Scotland, and as a scientist, he should have known better, but he became a pyramid nut and began writing voraciously and voluminously about the pyramid being the handiwork of God, and he used something called the pyramid inch, which he created, and he and John Taylor came up with this measurement. And then Russell, fascinated with this stuff, became hooked on it. So he kind of meshed in the pyramid into chronology, and it all was a mess. But I'll put up a chart that the Bible students used and still use today. It's called Chart of the Ages, and it was devised by Russell, really with Barber. In its earliest conception, was a dispensational chart with arcs, and I will make note of the time here so I can put that in. The Chart of the Ages, which I've put in earlier videos, is a graphical representation of chronology that was devised out of the Bible. Russell didn't develop most of the chronology, but he did use it, and some of it is unique to the Bible students, and they came up with some dates, he and Barber, that the Lord arrived in 1874 invisibly, and so that Jesus had returned, and he was finishing up a work called the Harvest Work, according to Russell, where he was gathering the last of the members of the high calling, which was the 144,000 who would get a heavenly reward. And that was all based on chronology, and the Chart of the Ages was depicted that, and it became more complicated over time. with overlaps and different dispensations, sub-dispensations being added, and he added the pyramid into it and the tabernacle, and so this chart of the ages became sort of a single graphical representation of all of what Bible students believed. Now, Bible students movement really got started on the footing, on the basis of chronology. We're at the end times. That's basically what Russell was preaching. That Jesus did come to end the world, to set up his 1,000-year kingdom of righteousness in 1874. And that within 40 years, and the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. He used the chronology of 606 BC being the time of when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, and that the punishment was a double, 1260. And another 1260, because the Lord said I would pour out upon you double. And they took a day for a year in the chronology, so that was 2,520 years. Add that to 606 BC, and you come out with 1914. And Russell predicted that the kingdom, 1,000-year kingdom, the harvest work would be done. The call to heaven would be finished. The 144,000 would be complete. They would be co-rulers with Jesus Christ. And in 1914, Armageddon would begin. Jesus and his church in the heavens would destroy all of the institutions on earth and bind Satan and cast him into a bottomless pit and establish Jesus' kingdom. And that was all to happen in 1914. And they called that the end of Gentile times, because that was to be the end of Gentile dominion over the nation of Israel. Well, things weren't happening fast enough for Russell, and 1914 didn't play out. There's so many videos. I mean, you go to the XJW YouTube sites, like Lloyd Evans has a video specifically on 1914, and so many others, where the erroneous concept, why 1914 is wrong. And that has to do with basically the meticulous records that were kept by the Neo-Babylonians under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and his sons. And they're able, through eclipses and being able to, because there's a cycle, I forget exactly, is the Sosa cycle or something like that. But anyway, there's an 18-year plus cycle for the I didn't write it down, for the lunar eclipses. And that by matching up the arrangement of the eclipses, they're able to know exactly, they can fit the cycle exactly to the Neo-Babylonian period, and they're able to know exactly what year BC the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, which was 587 and 586 BC, which is not 606 BC. It's 19-20 years difference, and it doesn't lead to 1914, and that was the key prophecy that chronologically established the date 1914 for Russell. And then he had other things like the pyramid measurements and stuff like that that he used to help support. You can't have too many supporting ideas, you know. But Bible students, even though, and I've discussed the history of the Watchtower Society and how the Bible student movement hadn't died, that there was a separation that took place during the 1920s and 30s, and a regathering of the Bible students during the 30s and 40s, and to a great extent, most of the Bible students that had associated with Charles Taze Russell regathered and carried on the Bible students movement outside of the Watchtower, independent of the Watchtower. And Rutherford initially, because at the time, Watchtower Association had really dropped. The numbers dropped. They had gone from, you can find these numbers in JW Facts, but look up the 1920s memorial numbers in JW Facts, and you could see that it went from roughly 17,000 at the time of Charles Taze Russell's death to 90,000 in 1924, 1925. It was roughly 90,000. And then it dropped to 17,000 in 1928. And that is a substantial drop. That's 75 or 80% decline in numbers. And there was a huge, I had actually done the yearbook. They published the names of the Pilgrim speakers in a list, and they had been doing that. I mean, they had done that all the way into the 1950s. And in 1927, the very first yearbook, they called them Pilgrim speakers, which was the terminology that Bible students called the traveling speakers. Today, they're pioneers, and they're full-time ministers. Back in the 1920s, they were colporteurs. And the Watchtower had speaking representatives called pilgrims, and they were sent out by Watchtower to all of the different ecclesias, because a congregation in those days was called an ecclesia, to provide ministry service to the different ecclesias throughout the United States. And I did a comparison of the names on the list in 1927. They were called Pilgrim speakers. And then I did so again in 1929, which represented 1928. Okay, so 26 represents the work of 1927 represents the work of 1926, and 1929 represented 1928. And so the names, not only did the number of names drop. Now, the what I found was that there was a drop in the number of names from 1927 to 1929, about 30. The list was about 30 names shorter. It was in that neighborhood, roughly. I don't have the exact figures. I did this last year, actually, so I'm just going by memory. There were some 280 speakers, I believe, and then there was 250 or so speakers in 1929, which, again, was service year 1928. But not only was there a decline in the numbers because there were names added, Um, there was a substantial change in the names. So I did a name by name comparison of those listed in 1929 and those listed in 1927. So not only was the 1929 list a little bit shorter, not so much that visually it would catch your eye, but the names, significant change over in the names that were in the list. And I think it was something like 50 to 60% of the names that were in the 27 yearbook were not in the 1929 yearbook. And so while some names were eliminated, they also added some so that the disparity didn't look as visually as bad as it really was. So what I'm getting at is that early on in the formation, in that transitional period, just at the time when Jehovah's Witnesses became a separate sect, the sect that controlled Watchtower through Joseph Rutherford, there were fewer people who called themselves Jehovah's Witnesses than there were that were Bible students. The thing that was different was that the Bible students were disenfranchised and they were scattered all over the place, and there was no organization. People had lost touch, and they didn't know where to meet. So these became isolated. While the Watchtower, there was a coalesced organization around which the structure could be maintained, and in fact, it was as a result of that structure that Rutherford was able to make up those numbers. And by his death, there were as many Jehovah's Witnesses as there were back in the mid-1920s. So he made up in short order, within a decade, he made up all of the losses. Now, on the other hand, because of the fact that this all took place during the Depression, there was the financial side. The Bible students didn't really have any money. Okay, the Watchtower had a reserve, and they had the assets, and they had the equipment, the factory, the properties, and they owned all of that. So they didn't need to. They didn't have the problem with finances as much as the Bible students would have in trying to regroup and coalesce. But nonetheless, the Dawn started in 1932 by Norman Woodworth. He was the cousin of Clayton Woodworth. I know I've said this in the past. Clayton Woodworth was one of the directors of the Watchtower Society. He was the editor of the magazine Golden Age, and he was one of the higher level individuals, let's say, in the hierarchy of the Watchtower. Norman Woodworth was his first cousin. He had been associated with the Watchtower's radio work, WBBR, and apparently he wouldn't preach what Rutherford wanted him to preach, and he got disfellowshipped. He was on the verge of leaving anyway. He joined the New York, Brooklyn Bible Students Ecclesia, which was an independent PBI class that, again, you'll have to do some research. The PBI with the Pastoral Bible Institute, they broke away very shortly after Charles Russell's death. They opposed Rutherford's being elected in as president of the Watchtower. P.S.L. Johnson was the founder of the, I'm going to crank this up because it's starting to get sunny, and I want to get a little shade. PSL Johnson started the PBI. So anyway, before I deviate too much it's just a little background history. By the mid-1940s, the Dawn had done much of the work in regathering the Bible students movement, and they were back again, pretty much following the structure of the Bible students movement as it was during Charles Taze Russell's day. And they stuck faithfully to Russell's words, studying out of the studies in the scriptures, printing his books and booklets, Tabernacle Shadows, and developing pamphlets that were based on his work. And so the Dawn, even though it never grew to be like the Watchtower, and there was Bible students were very, very concerned about a controlling group. So the Dawn never exerted control over any classes, and Bible students were really sensitive about that. And so during the 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, there was a lot of cooperation and cohesion between the various Bible students groups that associated with the Dawn. But by the mid-1960s, the euphoria, a lot of the old-timers had passed away. A lot of the original Bible students that were young in Russell's later years were old and passing away in the 1960s, and by the late 1970s, most of them were dead. Norman Woodworth himself died in 1975. But the character, the idea of the Bible students really didn't change. And most of them, through into the 1970s, adhered to Russell's chronology, but the friction between Bible students in the movement at the time were that there were some that realized that chronology had to have been flawed to some degree. And so there were some Bible students who stopped putting the emphasis on the chronology, whereas the others were more orthodox in their adherence to Russell's writings. The two groups actually were like 99.999% in agreement, but just because there was a very slight deviation in understanding in the chronology, and when the kingdom would start, that was a big issue, and it caused big splits in the later 60s and through the 70s. I remember those splits. I was boy into my teens when these things were occurring, and because I was young and this is all I knew, we had the truth. It disturbed me to see these difficulties, these troubles happening in the Bible students movement. Classes were splitting, ecclesias were splitting, and the movement was fracturing. And there were those that were Dawn supporters, and then there was this organization that arose that had their own general convention. They called themselves the Divine Plan Organization for a while, but then basically there's still remnants of that left, but because the Bible students movement has declined so much in over the years, the differences, and especially the people that fought over the differences, most of them are dead today. That was 40, 50 years ago. And so they're gone. And a lot of the younger people are, realizing that 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 the differences weren't really all that big, and so there's sort of a coming together again, and that's why you see in the Bible Students Convention pictures, and I'll see if I can throw one up into this video, um, are about 400, and they have been so for the last 15, 20 years, because the what used to be essentially two different factions of Bible students are now coming back together again, and so they're bolstering the numbers again by doing so, especially at the General Convention. But anyway, Bible students still haven't lost their fascination with chronology. I mean, throughout this period of time, from the time of the 1930s and 40s, the Bible students were always looking for the beginning of the kingdom. When would the beginning of the kingdom occur? There were different theories and different chronologies that were proposed. One by a notable Bible student by the name of George Kendall. You could see his name in a 1927 yearbook. And I think for up until 1928, his name appears in the Pilgrim Speakers list. He was very closely aligned with Watchtower from way back in Russell's day, and he came out with this idea of a 40-year. The Bible is big on numbers, and 40 is one of those numbers. And between 1915 between 1874 and 1915 was 40 years. He said, well, there are a lot of doubles in the Bible students in the chronology, Bible students chronology. Maybe there was a double with the 40 years. So you had 40 years between 1874 and 1914, and if it was a double, then you add another 40 years, and then you come out with 1954. And so in 1954, a lot of Bible students were in anticipation of the establishment of the 1,000 years, and again, as with all time predictions, people were expecting that the 1,000 years would begin, and that the world would end, and that the time of trouble would culminate in Armageddon, and it wouldn't be advisable to have children. Well, I was born in 1955, so I was fortunate that I was born. My parents were counseled not to have children during the 1950s, because of this chronology. That was, boy, it got sunny again. When it gets sunny, it gets really hot. You can see it's still quite bright. I'm sorry about this. Okay, so anyway, but Bible students never really lost their interest in chronology. Chronology was always something that was huge. I mean, it was the Bible students movement that had 1925, and they did that through an application of the Jubilees, the 49 years, from the time of the beginning of Adam, and I don't know how they know what the starting point is. When people put together Bible chronologies, and this one thing that I notice that Bible students do is that they take the Bible as a valid source of information, that because God put it there, this is God's book, and so they take the Bible at face value, and they don't give consideration or due consideration to experts in the field. And for example, my cousin has, and that's the video clip I'm trying to download now. Um, a very elaborate chronology that was built upon from the time of Russell to the current era, and he again is trying to predict when the kingdom is going to start, when the harvest work is going to end. Again, this is something that Bible students have been doing since, for time immemorial. The Bible students movement over 140 years old, and it's kind of sad in a way that they spend their resources and time all devoted to trying to understand these things that have no real basis in truth. My cousin's chronology, and I don't want to pick on him. He's a nice guy, and he's not stupid. He's a really smart guy. He was a mathematics major, but he's caught up in this delusion. This idea. Paul said it in Romans. He says, "The Spirit beareth witness with our spirit that we are the sons of God." In other words, we're telling ourselves that we're special because God has revealed it to us through His Holy Spirit. And so, it's a matter, and we can delude ourselves about a lot of different things. I was deluded. I was deluded into thinking that I was begotten by the Holy Spirit. I didn't feel anything. There wasn't anything tangible that I could point to. But the fact that I was a Bible student and believed the doctrines and teachings and the culture of the Bible students was evidence to me that I was one of the Spirit begotten. And so, you can delude yourself any number of ways, and that was for years and years, especially when from the time you were born, it's impregnated into your brain, that pounded over and over and over and over and over and over again, that this is the truth, this is the truth, this is the truth. And when you're born and raised into that, it's very difficult to shake those things from your mind. And I know Jehovah's Witnesses suffer from the same thing. So many have this guilt trip that how can I have believed this fantasy for so long? But the problem is that it's not you, the individual. It's what a high control group does to its people, and it really is something that's very hard to shake, because you've been so. Your world has been so closely controlled doctrinally that you can't have any other ideas and concepts. And so it's not really criticism, because I was like that myself. But on the other hand, you shouldn't beat yourself up either too badly that it took so long. For me, it was over 50 years before I could really see that what I believed for so long really wasn't the truth, and that I had essentially devoting my life to it was a waste of time. So anyway, again, the Bible students never lost their fascination with the idea of chronology, but looking up and the chronology of my cousin, I think he's probably one of the foremost Bible students right now in the area of promoting chronological analysis of the Bible. Things are critical to his chronology and understanding. For example, in the book of Kings and in Judges, and looking at what the experts have to say about these that that, for example, the chronology. If you try to, in through the Book of Kings, try to put together a succession of chronological events in the succession of kings, is intractably difficult. That's the quote. It's intractable, and that that among Bible scholars there's very little consensus on an acceptable method for determining the chronology of the kings in that book alone, in those first and second kings. And so, um, that fact alone adds in a tremendous amount of uncertainty into any kind of chronological scheme that you try to devise. It just, if it's intractable, it's an inherently unknowable. But taking kings as it's selective. Basically, it comes down to selective acceptance. Who you're going to say, who fits your conception, your model, your idea of what the truth is, and you're going to accept that. That's bias. That's what you call confirmation bias, and that's what Bible students do. It's the same thing in the Book of Judges. They're just different things. For example, one thing, the Book of Exodus says that Israel was in Egypt 430 years, and then you have Paul, who claims that that 430 years was from Abraham to Moses. And these are just, that's only one example of a discrepancy that in the Bible that makes the ability to understand the succession of chronological events intractable. And it's not me. I mean, these are experts who look at this over and over and over and over. I mean, these are people, and some of them who really want this to work out. The same thing with the Book of Judges. There are big differences. I guess if you look at the Book of Judges and the judges from a consecutive point of view, there's 410 years in that period, and then another way of looking at it gives you 319 years. So there's very, very little acceptance. And part of the problem is this: what text do you accept? There are big differences between the different sources. The Protestant Bible bases its understanding on the Masoretic text, and yet there's the Septuagint, and then there's the Sumerian, and there are other sources that don't even exist today, that are referenced in the New Testament, that we don't have any understanding of what, we don't have any of those around today. So, these things add so much uncertainty. And the other thing is this: I when you look at science and the support for science, the chronology is all based on whether or not there was an Adam. I mean, without an Adam, a single Adam and Eve, and without the belief that all humans came from two individuals some 6,000 years ago, that's the key to the understanding of all of this. And yet we know, I mean, just recently, within the last decade, maybe it's a little longer. To me, I'm getting older, so time, it seems like the Hubble is new to me, okay? So that, but there's a graveyard that was found in the Saharan desert. That's 10,000 years old. There are hundreds of skeletons that have yielded tremendous information on the culture of people at a time when the world's climate was so much different. Apparently, this graveyard was near a large, what had been a lake, and there are all kinds of artifacts there from of that associated with fishing, spears and hooks and things like that. These are the Kiphian people, Kiphian culture, and there was quite a sophisticated culture. They even wore jewelry, and they were large people. Stood 6 feet and taller. I think the tallest is 6'8". I mean, that's big. That's like modern humans. These were modern humans. And so, this, and then there were two cultures actually, separated by about 1,000 years. There was the Tenarian culture, which was roughly 7,000 years ago, who used the same place, the same location, and they, I guess, the area became uninhabitable when the Sahara became desert, and about 3,500 years ago. With the last glacial age ended roughly 12,000 years ago, and there were significant, tremendous climatological changes that took place on the Earth, and so the Sahara, which is still growing, came into existence. At one time, it was a large plain, a lush plain like the Kalahari, not Kalahari. What's that savanna? They large. There's a huge savanna, and maybe it's the Kalahari, but that's a desert, Kalahari Desert. But anyway, there are large areas that are savannas where huge numbers of animals, wildebeests and zebras and all, migrate to in the wet season, and that's what the Sahara was like some 10,000 years ago, but no longer that way. In fact, actually, there's the Earth precesses on its axis every 22,000 years, and that has a large effect on climate patterns around the world, cyclic, and the cores taken from the Atlantic Ocean, where sediments show desertification versus times when the Sahara is lush. So it's cyclic. The Sahara alternates between being a lush environment to desert. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And that goes according to the Earth's precession around its axis is around 22,000 years. So anyway, there's a lot that the Bible students tend to ignore because they're so steeped in the idea that they have the truth, and they'll dismiss arguments such as the discovery of the Kiphian culture 10,000 years ago, because it first off, it doesn't fit their chronology. It doesn't fit their understanding, the model of the world. None of the Darwin's idea of the origin of man, the succession of hominids from Australopithecus to Homo erectus to modern man is not acceptable, and that took place over millions of years. But Bible students won't accept that that's the case. Although some Bible students realize that the age of the earth is 4.5 billion years. So they try to, they kind of, there's some science they can't deny, and then there's other science that they're just putting the blinders on, and they won't accept. There's still Bible students who believe that the earth is only 49,000 years old. The Watchtower believes that, in essence. They don't say that they accept Russell's particular chronology, the nice, neat 7,000 year creative days, which makes the earth 49,000 years old. But they say that the earth is tens of thousands of years old. Well, that doesn't fit. I mean, we know through various radioactive decay techniques that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and that we have very reliable cosmological techniques that show that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old, and we cannot. It's hard to deny these things. How do you deny that? And it just doesn't fit in with this human-centric view of the Bible. The Bible, with the universe so immense, so hugely immense, and so old, the probabilities that life like us in other places of the universe is one. Essentially one. I mean, there have to be other intelligent, created material beings on other planets within our own galaxy, because there are a trillion stars in our galaxy with 3 or 4 trillion planets, and a small percentage, which results in the billions of planets that are Earth-like planets that could sustain life like ours. And so it's fooling yourself to think that the Bible was made just for us, that we were God's only creation, and that there's some secret message for us. And it's just denying all the evidence that science accumulated over the last 150 years, or really since the time of Newton, to that says that is contrary to the Bible. And so, but when a person is deluded and they have invested so much of their energy, so much of their life, so much of their time into a belief, they're not going to it's going to be shattering to their sense of who they are, to suddenly deny that any of that was valid. So it's really a matter of life and death, in a sense, to the individuals who hold on to these beliefs. But the thing that the one other point I wanted to make was, how do we know? Because the Bible students often, I've heard many Bible students criticize the dating methods. I mentioned radiological dating methods, but that's not a valid argument. Science has pretty well established, overcome all of the obstacles, anything that people can throw at in the way of criticizing radiological dating techniques. For example, carbon-14. This Scythian culture that they found is 10,000 years old. There's no question. There are all kinds of ways in which the carbon dating can be corrected and can be validated. Tree rings have validated corrective methods for understanding what the carbon was at a particular time, and carbon dating is long established now as being accurate to about maybe 50,000 years. And the Kiphian culture is well within that. And the same with the wall art in the caves of France, that sophisticated wall art, which is about 30,000 years old. So humans like us have been around far longer than 6,000 years. And then the other thing that there was, what got me started on this is the discovery of these 4 spot commercials that came out in 2018, and a series of videos on a conference on chronology that was offered to Bible students in 2015, and there are 6 videos that document this chronological study seminar, this chronological seminar, and it predicts now a new date that the kingdom is going to begin in 2043, and that the harvest work will start coming to a close in 2029, and that there will be a 14-year period in which that work will phase out, and the emphasis was, now that we have all of this chronology, and they spent, I believe it was a weekend, going over 2 whole days of chronological studies and putting together, building on the traditional Bible student chronology from Charles Russell to later chronologies that were put together by various Bible students who had interest in the subject, and coming out with a new forecast for the end, for the beginning of the 1,000 years, and that is 2043. Ironically, that's 200 years later than William Miller. I wonder if there wasn't some sort of psychological coincidence there for its being 200 years after William Miller's prediction. He said 1843. They say 2043. I don't know. It's just it's a little bit too coincidental for me. And a lot of those coincidences, they are. Yes, they are, because if something, they can't be coincidence. That's the argument. They can't be coincidence. There are too many of them. Well, these coincidences are also artifacts of confirmation bias. They're also choosing the chronologies that fit in with the model that you particularly want. And when all of the experts say that you can't put together a chronology of the Bible that's accurate, there's going to be hundreds of years of discrepancy because of the problems with the which text are you going to use, and which chronology are you going to use in the Bible. You have your own choices within the Masoretic text alone. There are discrepancies. So, there's so much room for getting the answer. It's almost like having the answer and then working back the numbers to make everything fit. the answer that you want, and that's easy for people to do. So, I still find it hard, to see that the main evidence for 1914 was 606 BC, and that was the key date for Bible students. Watchtower changed it to 607 because there was no 0 BC or 0 AD, and so they bumped up they added a year, 607 BC, to compensate for the fact that there wasn't a 1 or 0 AD. But the chronology is the same otherwise, and they used that same chronology for the ending of the times of the Gentiles in 1914. And the Watchtower has got 1914 heavily invested, as well as the Bible students, and it's been demonstrably shown that 586, 587 BC is the date. And I don't actually think that my cousin, who sponsored this chronology seminar, actually disagrees with that. I think it's hard to disagree with that, but I guess that's the argument for 1914 based on that is lost, and that he comes to 1874 using other chronological methods, associations, and they're not as strong. They're weaker, and basically it has to do with parallels with more ancient events and symmetries, and these things are. I mean, the universe is not that symmetrical, and neither is. I mean, symmetry is a big part of physics and understanding the universe, but the kind of symmetries that we're talking about in the Bible are really introduced human artifacts, and they're assumptions. There's nothing to base the idea that these symmetries are actually real, that these symmetries exist in the scriptures. But I see the time is getting off a little bit. I will put in the short clip for this seminar. I certainly wouldn't put six videos, each like an hour and a half, 2 hours long, on the in this video. I just would do it for you, but I would add the one thing, because I think it explains why I'm seeing more activity on the parts of the Bible students, because the conclusion of the seminar was, now that we're very close to 2029, and in this 14 years between 2029 and 2043, what are we going to do with our time? We as Bible students should be active, and we are active, but let's go out with a bang. That was what was said.
Does that mean that the age of sacrifice is closing down? Now we're going to get to the heart of the issue. I want to emphasize this point. If that's the point, how long before the kingdom comes do you expect the high calling to begin closing down? And maybe you say, well, it's already starting. Okay, but we're getting a lot of response overseas. We really are. Maybe we can probe a little more even domestically. I don't know. We'll see. But I think it's still going, the high calling. But will it be still operating 2 years before the church is complete? 1 year? 5 years? It takes a little while, to make your call and election sure. So I don't think it's going to be operating full bore ahead right until the climax. So do we have, 14 more years of opportunity before the opportunities begin to wend them way down? Well, I think maybe that's right. Maybe. Now, this is very interpretive. Have you noticed? Very interpretive. I think it's reasonably interpretive, but it is interpretive. We'll have to wait and see. But if we've got opportunities now, we've only got another decade and a half to take advantage of them. Let's push. Let's do whatever we can. Now, I know that the brethren are doing a lot. They do what they can. But we got a closing opportunity. The apostles aren't with us anymore. The messengers are all gone. But the church is still here. We still have a little time to do something. Let's go out with a bang.
If Bible students are listening and taking this into account and giving credibility to this idea of this new chronology, then I understand that why there are brand new videos, because the dawn has been essentially quiet, dormant, for and sort of just fading away for the last 20, 25 years, 30 years, and suddenly to see activity, it makes me wonder why. There's one other thing. In this particular video, there's that I attached here. There's an individual at the end sitting down and reading his Bible, who I swear to God was in the Watchtower bunker videos in 2017, I think. If you look at Lloyd Evans' website, The Worst Convention Ever, and he does a rebuttal of the bunker, what they call the bunker videos. And there's a young, dark-haired male in the basement, in the group of people hiding away from those who were going to persecute the Watchtower, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Great Tribulation. And I swear to God that's the same guy. Did he jump ship from Jehovah's Witnesses to be a Bible student? I don't know. But I swear the face is exactly the same. And there's no way that Watchtower would use a Bible student for making a video. So I don't know. It's up to you. Check it out. I swear. My wife is good at these things, and she says it's the same guy. So I'll leave it up to you. I just think that it's an interesting aside. So anyway, I wish you all well, and have a good weekend.